Hello and welcome to the CSN3M Mindset Monday podcast. I'm Andrew Wade with Case Specific Nutrition. On this channel, we focus on the 3 M's: mindsets, mentoring, and myth busting, all as they pertain to health and nutrition. This podcast is brought to you by Case Specific Meal Prep, our very own in-house meal preparation and delivery service. Check out csmpgh.com and place your order by Thursdays at noon to get fresh, dietitian-approved, chef-inspired meals delivered straight to your door, contactless. Before we dig into today's episode, take a moment and make sure you subscribe to this channel. And at the end of this episode, please share this with a friend or loved one and make sure you hashtag spread the health so that we can continue our campaign of impacting people's lives. Last piece before we dig in is we actually, as you can see, I have a person here with me that we're going to be interviewing today. I wanted to give a heads up that there's actually a third member of the cast today, and it is Apollo the Rottweiler, and he's right here. And so just wanted to give you a heads up that somewhere in this episode you might see a random bear head pop up, and that is just our big lug Apollo right here. So we do have a third guest, but without further ado, today's episode is a very special episode for us. We have Auburn Weisensale. She is the Assistant Athletic Director of Sports Nutrition for Pitt. Did I butcher that?
You're good.
I got it. Yeah. Okay. I practiced it all night. But she works with the Pitt students, specifically the athletes, and I'm going to let her dig into a little bit more. But first, thank you for coming. We really appreciate it, and we're so lucky to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. My name's Auburn Weisensale. I'm the Assistant AD for Nutrition at the University of Pittsburgh. So I work with all of our student athletes to help them fuel for practice and competition. I work with all 19 of our sports teams, and the athletes keep me pretty busy with all of the things they have going on.
Oh, absolutely, I bet. So we're gonna do a couple things today, right? We have basically like a sports dietitian that is royalty right here. So we're going to make sure we pick her brain about all things sports. I wanna make sure we dig into sort of what she does a little bit today. And then we're gonna talk about sports nutrition, and then we're gonna kind of dig into your path as well, and from a professional standpoint. So for any of the students that listen to this podcast that are interested in learning about some of the dietetics paths, make sure you stay tuned through the end of this episode. So again, that position, 19 teams, lots of students, lots of goals. How did that get started? I guess let's start with this. How long have you been in the position?
So I've been at Pitt for 5 years now.
Okay.
It started just as a sports dietitian. There was me and another lady who was doing football and men's and women's basketball, and then I was taking all the Olympic teams. But then over the years we had some turnover. Eventually we were able to get that position to be just football only, and then I took over men's and women's basketball. But with that, administration was super supportive of getting me some more help. So I have fellow positions where I have a brand new dietitian who is kind of entry level, but has experience in sports nutrition, and I assign them 1 or 2 teams and let them take it and run with it. So that's where I'm there to mentor them, but they can also take care and service the athlete better than if it were just me doing all 19 teams. So I have someone for men's and women's basketball specifically, and then someone who takes a fall, a winter, and a spring sport. That takes probably about 100 athletes off my plate or more. So that allows me to then start to do more with the teams that I've kept, and then get those other teams to continue to grow.
It sounds like there's a lot of coordination now, but that maybe wasn't the case. So why don't we kind of rewind a little bit? When you first started, what did the sports nutrition of Pitt look like? So kind of tell us where you started, because it sounds like you've advocated and sort of evolved this position into something pretty incredible.
So when I first got to Pitt, we just had a little mini fueling station that was a room of bagels, fruit, and some granola bars. And there were many times that we would just run out of food by 9 a.m. and there was no organization to who was taking what or how we were tracking it. And then eventually we just built a better relationship with our on-campus food service providers and set up a whole ordering system and inventory system to where we could have way more food, way more options, and keep track of it with our student athletes to make sure that they were getting what they needed before practice and after practice, and that there was enough for everybody. And then from there, we have renovated a concession stand in the Fitzgerald Fieldhouse to be like a smoothie station and like a full-on fueling station. And then just last January, we renovated the sports complex where baseball, soccer, and softball and lacrosse are, and that has a full-on fueling station with smoothie bar and everything like that. Oh, so wow. With that, I also have volunteers that will staff it from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. So I work a lot with the like undergrad programs and finding those volunteers because we can't really run without them, but they'll help make the smoothies, they'll help keep things stocked, and then make sure the athletes have what they need. And that's been what's allowed us to like keep growing and pushing the envelope to what's next and how can we be better.
Oh, that's wonderful. I will say, and this is going to date me a little bit actually, but when I went to Pitt, I will never forget that on a regular basis, I would see Sam Young and Dwan Blair, who both ended up going to the NBA. This was back in 2010. They would go to McDonald's almost every day on Pitt's campus. I worked at the GNC across the street, and I would just see them go in and out. So they had to basically like live off McDonald's. And so I think it sounds like Pitt's come a long way since the 2010 days.
Yeah.
So that's fantastic. Why don't you tell us a little bit about like what you see happening? So again, obviously so much growth over these last 5 years. Sort of give us a taste of what you're thinking Pitt fueling is going to look like, and then we'll start to talk about the athletes.
Yeah, so the end goal is really getting meals for our student athletes. So right now, only our basketball and our football programs have 2 meals a day. So my goal is to get at least 1, maybe 2 meals for every student athlete in some kind of like training table or cafeteria. So that way they can have real food in addition to the snacks that we're getting at the fueling station.
Very nice. So yeah, continuing to feed these athletes. And that's the mark of today really is going to be this reminder of why fueling is so important. And I think you're going to hear us go back to that over and over again. But one of the things I kind of want to segue over to, right, is if we pause for a second and go, okay, 19 teams, a variety of sports, and within sports there's positions that require very different dietary structures, right? So for those of you not in the sports nutrition world, it might not be as obvious to think about, but the easiest thing I could say is an offensive lineman for Pitt football is going to eat very differently than the libero of the women's volleyball, right? And so we're talking about someone that probably needs 6,000 calories a day versus someone that might need 2,500. Pretty massive shifts in feeding, fueling. We're talking about hundreds of these people. How do you tackle that part? So like obviously you've got this great volunteer group and you have this staff, but talk to us a little bit about working with the individuals and how you get to a point where you know what they need and you can support them.
Yeah, so individually, I'll like sit down with the athletes and do a one-on-one and really start to understand what works for them and what's working right now. And then based on their preferences and their schedule and all of that and what type of food access they have, start to build out a plan for them. And we use the performance plates a lot, the like 3 different heavy training, moderate training, easy training, and help them really build their plate based on how hard they're training. So like your lineman is gonna follow that heavy training plate every day pretty much, where someone like on the volleyball team is gonna go between those like moderate training plates and sometimes the easier training plates. So. Okay. But yeah, really also digging into their preferences, because if I'm recommending something that they don't really like or isn't realistic for them to eat, then they're not going to be able to get those calories in. So really gearing it to them.
Absolutely. And that is one of the biggest things with sports nutrition, right? Is these are athletes, they are burning, and the reality is if they're not keeping up with their needs, their performance is going to suffer massively. Right. I like that there's a little bit of a case-specific element to it, right? That you actually do get to meet with the athletes one-on-one. That's so important, as you know, and that's something that we believe in extremely, here, obviously. So very, very cool to hear that. Now, let's dig a little bit more into like a couple of sort of what we'll call like your more common conversations with the athletes, right? So talk to us a little bit about some of the things that you find yourself noticing about where the athletes struggle nutritionally, and I guess maybe the easiest way to ask is, what's the thing that you do most that you think really like enhances their performance?
Yeah. I guess the thing that most of our athletes struggle with that I see is just eating meals throughout the day and not skipping meals, and finding a way to get them in and make sure it is realistic in their schedule. And then things that really help set apart their performance is going back to that individualized approach of, do we need just like a carbohydrate specific strategy for you to follow because you have the protein and everything else hammered out, or do we need a hydration strategy? Giving them something that they can follow that is specific to them, that maybe isn't like a full-on meal plan because they're able to fuel in other ways, but something specific that maybe they need to work on.
Yeah.
So
getting them to eat, right?
Yeah.
We were chatting a little bit before this, and this is something that happens not just in the obviously the collegiate or true athlete, but even in the weekend warriors and the physically fit people. We live in this society now that has an overabundant amount of people that are looking at calories from a restrictive standpoint, right? With 80% of people now classified as overweight and obese. You get a lot of restriction is like that sort of mindset. Well, athletes and active people are not that population, and so they end up getting this conflicting information. And I know within the private practice world, when we work with athletes, I get this all the time, like do you think intermittent fasting would be useful for me? And it's like, absolutely not. No, like you need to fuel your body. So it sounds like even within the collegiate athletes, you're seeing, and it might not be because they're trying to follow a diet fad, but really just timing, crazy schedule, access to food. Getting them to eat is really, really important.
Right. Yeah, the underfueling is one of the biggest things we're combating right now.
Now, have you noticed in these 5 years as you've built these fueling stations and you've been able to, it sounds like massively and radically improve access.
Yeah.
Do you notice, like if you think about your athletes 5 years ago to the athletes now, do you feel like that's improved?
It definitely has. It's getting better, but we still have that long way to go in terms of them trying to like build a lunch out of what's at the fuel station, when really like a sandwich, a yogurt, and a piece of fruit is more like a snack for them. So helping them really understand like what their meal should look like and what a snack should look like and how many of those we need in a day. But it's definitely gotten a lot better now that we have more for them.
It sounds like that's where, when you're hoping that the providing of meals can become something that's standard and commonplace, that's why it's because you have these fueling stations that might be more like snacks that they could spread, something pre-workout, something post-workout, something between practices. There's our snoring Rottweiler. You have all these different food sources, being sourced from different places, but a lot of times they're not being able to like sit down and truly eat a big meal.
Right.
Do you have any general, like when you work with the athletes, what's the range of like, when we think about number of feedings per day with meals and snacks, like what do you typically see and recommend in terms of how they spread it out across their day?
Yeah, really anywhere between 6 and 10 times a day is really how much they should be eating.
Let's pause for a second. 6 to 10 times a day, right? You have to fuel your body to perform. Elite performance comes from fueling. So 6 to 10 times a day. I love that. I wanted to make sure we said that out loud.
And helping them execute on that can sometimes be like putting reminders in their phone, or if there's a certain time of day that they like really struggle with, maybe I'll shoot them a text of like, what do we have for snack today? Or remember to get that snack, kind of thing. So really helping them plan that out can be helpful.
Yeah, and those fueling stations can be so good because, like you said, a lot of what they do is probably on the go.
Yeah.
So you said that yogurt, that sandwich, those are all things that need to exist to ground their day, but they need a couple like solid meals to kind of boost that a little.
Right.
Good.
Yeah.
So we've got them kind of spreading their food out throughout the day. Obviously, you're juggling all sorts of crazy schedules and that kind of thing. Are you able to talk with them and kind of work with them about, beyond just like the food habits, but like making sure like they're sleeping and sort of those other lifestyle components?
Yeah, and when we do like a 24-hour recall, we're able to see like when are you waking up for training and when are you going to bed after studying, and then we can really educate on like how much sleep are you getting and what's optimal for someone who's doing so much training. And same with like time management of, are we able to slip in like some study time here or there during the day instead of saving it all for night? So
nice. Now, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm just curious. Is there any athlete that you've worked with recently that comes to mind where you watched they had no real connection to their food, and you were able to work with them, and then they started fueling differently, and they saw like a big boost in performance.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about any of those? Obviously, you don't have to name names, but anyone that comes to mind or stands out for you.
Yeah, I mean, I have a few,
I
but
don't doubt that.
the one in particular, you map out like what they should be eating and where and how that fits in their day, and specifically after practice, they're like, I can finally get through a practice and I'm not like hitting the wall and my performance isn't suffering. And with this individual, we worked on getting like intra-practice fuel. So within the first hour of training, they're having like an applesauce packet, and then 2.5 hours into training, we're doing a bar or another applesauce, something that's like easy to digest for them. With this 4-hour practice, now they can finally get to that 3rd and 4th hour without feeling like their performance is really suffering, all because of planning out like how the intra-practice fuel was going to go, and then pre-practice and post-practice.
I love that. That's wonderful. So part of the reason we wanted to interview Auburn is because it's really helpful, I think, to sort of establish what I like to call like the spectrum, right? Which is, we have so much information flying out there about restricting and reducing and calorie cutting and all of those things. And we have this simultaneous movement of this like desire for intense exercise, right? Whether it be Orange Theories or whether it be like, CrossFit style trainings. So we have this world of people that are now like not full-blown athletes, but are weekend warriors, and they are being taught to starve themselves and beat the crap out of their body. And I like to provide the spectrum of food, which is, okay, if you want to treat yourself like an athlete and beat the crap out of your body, let's look at how an athlete eats. And when you hear what she's saying, right, eating 6 to 10 times a day, constantly being on the lookout for a snack that has protein and carbs, the portability, the accessibility, fueling before, fueling during. This is very proactive, right? This isn't this restricted mindset. And I think for anyone out there listening that's utilizing exercise as a part of a healthy lifestyle, or has a competitive side that they're using exercise as a base for athletic and competition, we want to make sure that fueling is the mindset. And it sounds like you're kind of able to sort of scream that from the rooftops in a really cool way. And that's one of the reasons we wanted to have you on. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
So again, you have that non-traditional dietetics path, and I'd love to have you take a little bit of time and just kind of walk through your experience. So kind of give us your professional story.
Yeah, so I did undergrad at James Madison University, and I was a Division I field hockey player there. So going through school, I was interested in nutrition and the exercise piece, and then ended up a dietetics major, but I didn't have a full-time sports dietitian when I was there, so I didn't really understand the role that they played or what like a sports dietitian really did yet. So I went through undergrad thinking I wanted to be in like the ICU doing tube feedings and things from like an intense standpoint there. But then after undergrad, I actually didn't get matched to a dietetic internship right away. So I wasn't sure what I was gonna do, but I emailed the sports dietitians at UVA, where they had 2 full-time sports RDs, and asked if I could either shadow or volunteer during the summer. And they were like, we don't take people who shadow, but we'll take a volunteer. So I decided to commute from JMU in the summer. So I drove like 45 minutes or an hour every day just to like volunteer there. But initially I was only gonna volunteer 3 days a week in the summer. And then after my first day there, I was like, this is what I want to do. Can I come back tomorrow? And I just was there every day since then. And then actually my like lease ended up running out at JMU, and so I found a sublease in Charlottesville so that I could stay for like summer preseason camp with the football team. And that's where I really learned, like, you're at practice, you're in the weight room, you're in those fueling stations, like actually like with the athletes, and you're able to do like impact right from like, hey, Auburn, I remembered I wanted to ask you a question about XYZ, and you can answer it right there. And it's not like you're just sitting in an office all day, and you're just really able to connect with the athletes where they're at. And so that's like what really sold me. And then being an athlete who didn't have a full-time sports dietitian, but seeing what the UVA athletes had, I was like, I want to be this resource to other people. So that's where, after I left UVA, I then got matched to an internship, and I did the Penn State dietetic internship. And then from there, knowing I wanted to get into sports, I applied for the Gatorade SNP program, and I was matched at Indiana University. So there, I was given a couple teams and then mentored under their like veteran sports dietitian. So she was really able to teach me like in the trenches of like what does a full-time sports dietitian do. And then at that time I was now a dietitian, so I was able to do that counseling and take on my own teams and really learn what I should be doing and do it myself. So from there, I then got a position at the University of Florida as their sports nutrition assistant, and then I knew I always wanted to get closer to home. Home is Lancaster, PA for me, so this Pitt job opened up, and so I jumped on it and ended up getting it. So here I am, but my mentors had always told me, like, be willing to go anywhere, and I was lucky that I was able to get experience at a Big Ten, an ACC, and an SEC school before settling into a full-time position. So that was really good advice, even though I knew I wanted to get close to home, but you just had to be patient in knowing that you might live in Indiana or Florida and you might not get to come home for Christmas or some of those fun, holidays, but it's all worth it in the end.
Exactly. Well, what I can hear too is just like you've advocated at Pitt and you've created this position and you've added so much to it, right? Your education had a lot of self-advocacy too, right? A lot of times we get caught trying to check these boxes, and in reality, like, you reached out to UVA, you offered to volunteer, not just can I have shadowing experience, but can I actually commit my time, and you figured out ways to make those happen. So you really did push yourself forward in a really impressive way. And the path you forged, right? Sometimes it's hard. I always say when you're forging the path, you're the one hacking away at with the machete, so it can get a little bit exhausting and it's hard to see in front of you. But once you clear through that brush and you get this view, totally worth it. So thank you for sharing that. My last question for you before we wrap up is, do you have any advice that you would give a dietetics student that is like you, passionate about sports and fueling athletes and is struggling to find a way to sort of get that initial experience?
Yeah, my biggest recommendation is just volunteering. Find any and every volunteer opportunity that you can. And if it is in sports that you're interested, then reach out to the local sports dietitians. I mean, in Pittsburgh, we have plenty of schools around us that there's someone that is probably willing to take you under their wing and let you volunteer, and that's really where you can get started. So,
volunteerism, that's a big win. Well, thank you again for for taking the time, busy schedule, and coming and sitting on this couch with me and chatting through it. And for those of you listening, the recap is fuel, right? Feed the body, and think of yourself as an athlete if you are that person, right? Fitness requires that. And again, advocacy and volunteerism become big assets when you're trying to pave any path forward. So thanks again for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And thanks for listening as always. We appreciate you taking the time to tune into the CSN3M Mindset Monday podcast. We will be back next week with another episode. In the meantime, be well.